They told her not to get close. A shelter worker stood just behind her shoulder, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the massive dog in front of them. He weighed nearly 120 pounds, brindle coat, jaw built like something from a nightmare. 2 families had already brought him back. Nobody wanted the risk. Sarah knelt down anyway. She opened a small container, lifted a single bite onto a fork, and held it out toward him. The room went still. Even the shelter worker stopped breathing for a second. And then, he leaned forward, slow and careful, and took the bite right from her hand. Nobody in that room expected what happened next. A dog that big, that intimidating, wasn't supposed to be this gentle. But Sarah wasn't looking at his size, she was looking at his eyes, and something in them told her everything she needed to know. This is the story of Atlas, the cane Corso 2 families gave up on, and the one woman who refused to walk away. But to understand why an entire neighborhood was afraid of this dog, we have to go back to the very first day Sarah walked into that shelter. Because what she found waiting in that kennel wasn't what anyone had warned her about. Sarah was 29 years old, recently divorced, and living alone in a quiet rental just outside Austin, Texas. Her days had become small. Wake up, work from her laptop at the kitchen table. Eat dinner alone, go to bed. She told her sister the silence didn't bother her. She wasn't sure she believed it herself. She hadn't planned on adopting a dog that week. She'd gone to the shelter to drop off old towels and a bag of food, nothing more. Her grandmother had passed away that spring, and cleaning out her closet had felt like the least she could do. But then she passed a kennel near the back, and everything stopped. Inside sat the biggest dog she had ever seen in her life. His name tag read Atlas. According to the shelter's file, he had been surrendered twice, once by an elderly owner who could no longer care for him, and once by a young couple who said he was, in their words, too much dog. Karen, the shelter worker, walked up behind her. That one's been returned twice, she said quietly. People take one look at him and get scared. He's a cane Corso. Big head, big bark, big reputation. She paused. Doesn't mean he's dangerous. Just means nobody gives him a chance. Sarah stepped closer to the kennel. Atlas didn't bark, he didn't growl, he simply lifted his enormous head and rested it against the bars, watching her with dark, tired eyes. Can I sit with him? She asked. Karen hesitated. You sure? He's a lot of dog. Sarah didn't answer. She just opened the gate and sat down on the concrete floor. Atlas stared at her for a long moment, and then slowly. He lowered his massive body down beside her, not touching, just close. She stayed for almost an hour. By the time she stood up, her legs were asleep and her mind was made up. I'll take him, she said. Karen's eyebrows lifted. You know he's 120 pounds, right? You know what people are going to say. I don't care what people say, Sarah answered. I care what he does. The first week was harder than she expected. Atlas wouldn't eat from his bowl. He'd sniff it, look at her, and walk away. A vet friend suggested hand feeding just for a few days to build trust after so much rejection. So that's what she did, every meal. She sat on the kitchen floor with a container in her lap, offering bite after bite by hand. On the third day, he finally leaned forward and ate slowly, gently, like he was afraid of hurting her. By the second week, he was eating from his own bowl again, tail low but wagging. By the third, he was following her from room to room, close enough that she nearly tripped over him twice a day. Karen called to check in and could barely believe it was the same dog. That gentleness would define everything that came after. But what happened over the next few weeks would change how the whole street saw him. Word got around the neighborhood fast. 120-pound cane Corso, brindle and black masked, living 2 doors down. People crossed the street when they saw him on his leash. A few even called the city just to ask if the breed was legal there. Sarah didn't argue. She just kept living her life. And slowly, the picture people had of Atlas started to crack. He wasn't guarding the yard like a weapon. He was lying in the sun with his paws crossed, watching butterflies. He wasn't lunging at strangers. He was leaning his whole body weight against Sarah's leg every time she stood still, like he needed to feel her there. Then came the poodle. Sarah's sister was fostering a tiny white poodle who needed somewhere to stay for a few weeks. She was terrified to bring him near Atlas. He was smaller than one of Atlas's paws. But the moment they met, Atlas simply lowered his head, sniffed once, and sat down. He never moved fast around the little dog again. Not once. Neighbors who saw it happen didn't know what to think. A dog that size, that reputation, being that careful with something so small. And if this story is already touching your heart the way it touched ours, please take a second and subscribe. Every subscriber tells us these stories still matter. Little did anyone know, the real test of who Atlas truly was hadn't happened yet. As the weeks passed, Atlas became something more than a dog Sarah had rescued. He became the reason her mornings had shape again. He waited by the bathroom door while she brushed her teeth. He followed her to the mailbox, slow and patient, even in the Texas heat. If she closed a door for even a minute, she'd open it to find him sitting there waiting. She started talking to him the way people talk to family. About her day, about her ex-husband who never once asked how she was doing after the divorce, about her grandmother who would have adored this ridiculous, gentle giant of a dog. Their evenings settled into a rhythm neither of them had planned. Sarah would sit on the porch step with a cup of tea, and Atlas would lower his whole body down beside her, one giant paw resting across her foot like an anchor. Some nights she talked. Some nights she just sat there listening to him breathe. Moments like these remind us why stories like this deserve to be shared. The poodle stayed longer than expected, nearly 2 months, while Sarah's sister sorted out a permanent home. In that time, Atlas became something like a bodyguard for a dog 1/10 his size. He'd position himself between the poodle and the front door whenever someone knocked. He'd nudge him gently back with his nose if he wandered too close to the street. Neighbors who once crossed the road to avoid Atlas started stopping to ask about him instead. A woman down the block brought over a bag of treats for the gentle one, she said, almost embarrassed by how wrong she'd been. A kid who used to run inside when he saw Atlas coming now waited by the fence just to pet his enormous head. If you've ever felt this kind of love from an animal, you already know why people like Sarah never regret the dogs everyone else was scared of. Sarah started sleeping better. The house that used to feel too quiet now had the sound of 120 pounds of dog shifting in his sleep every night. She hadn't realized how much she needed that sound until it was there. And then one night in October at exactly 2:47 in the morning, everything changed. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke before she heard anything else. Atlas was already on his feet, barking a sound she had never once heard him make in almost a year together. Not a warning growl, a full, deep, urgent bark that shook the walls. She stumbled into the hallway and saw a faint gray haze creeping from the kitchen, where a forgotten stove burner had ignited a dish towel left too close to the flame. Smoke was already curling along the ceiling, thick enough to catch in her throat, thin enough that 30 more minutes might have gone unnoticed. Atlas didn't wait for instructions. He turned, ran to the guest room where the poodle had been sleeping, and gently took the tiny dog by the scruff of his neck, so careful, and carried him straight to the front door. Sarah grabbed her phone, got both dogs outside, and called the fire department with shaking hands. Neighbors came running out in bathrobes and pajamas, drawn by the barking and the smell of smoke in the night air. By the time firefighters arrived, the flames were still small enough to contain. Another 10 minutes, one of them told her, and this could have gone very differently. Sarah sat on the curb in the cold October air, Atlas pressed against her side, the tiny poodle curled safely in her lap. She thought about every person who had ever warned her about him, every family who had given him back, every neighbor who had crossed the street. None of them had seen this side of him. She almost hadn't either. What she realized that night would stay with her for the rest of her life. The fire department confirmed it if Atlas hadn't woken when he did. The smoke damage could have spread through the whole house before anyone noticed. A dog with weaker lungs or a lighter sleeper's instinct might have simply slept through it. Today, Atlas is 4 years old and impossible to imagine out of Sarah's life. He still waits by the bathroom door. He still follows her to the mailbox. The poodle found a permanent home with Sarah's sister, but he visits most weekends, and Atlas still lowers his head and sits the moment he walks in. The neighbors who once crossed the street now stop to say hello. The woman who called the city about his breed sends over banana bread every Christmas, addressed half-joking to Atlas and Sarah. Nobody in that neighborhood warns anyone about him anymore. Sarah doesn't talk about saving Atlas anymore. She knows now it never really worked that way. Some stories are too good to keep to yourself. And this is one Sarah tells every person who still crosses the street when they see him coming. Because the same dog two families gave up on, the same dog an entire neighborhood feared, turned out to be the one thing standing between his family and disaster. Maybe people were wrong about him all along. Maybe the biggest, most feared dogs are sometimes the ones with the softest hearts and the sharpest instincts to protect the family they love. So tell me, would you trust a 120-pound cane Corso around your family, or would you cross the street like everyone else did? Drop your answer in the comments below.